Ahead this morning, students slipping. Erika Sanzi with Parents Defending Education explaining the alarming drop in 8th grade scores nationwide. 8th grade test scores for history and civics dropped dramatically across the country this year and was the lowest since national education assessments began in 1994. Joining us to discuss is Parents Defending Education's Director of Outreach, Erika Sanzi. Good morning, Erika. Great to see you.
Hi, Jan. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, the scores, Erika, didn't just drop either. Some 40% of 8th graders in the U.S. scored below basic standards that were set out by our own education department. So how alarming is this?
Well, obviously, this is very troubling. 13% of 8th graders are considered proficient now in U.S. history. 13%. I mean, it's terrible. So I wish I could say that it was really surprising. It's not that surprising. We saw really terrible results also with, reading and math. And unfortunately, this decline began in 2014 and has just continued, on a downward trend. And so we have a problem, and that is that our over focus on math and ELA, which is English language arts, so reading and writing, that really meant that other subjects got pushed aside and weren't prioritized. And I think that's part of why we saw these results. The other big reason is just that there's been an ongoing debate for decades about the importance of teaching content to kids versus teaching them skills. And the skills people have been winning, which means that we're just not teaching kids information and facts and knowledge because we've gotten, bogged down with this philosophy of, they can just Google it. And I think that's really also what we're seeing in these results.
So remote learning, not the only factor, because the decline, as you mentioned, has been happening for the past decade and also comes at a time when U.S. history itself has become politically divisive. What did you make of Education Secretary Miguel Cardona attributing this to culture wars?
Yeah, I mean, that was a cheap shot, I thought. I thought it was a moment where he could have really made some substantive comments about where we're going wrong and how we could fix it. And interestingly, this is actually sort of a bipartisan thing that could happen because there's agreement on left and right that we're not teaching enough content. We're not teaching, providing kids with information and facts and knowledge. And but instead, he decided to make this about culture wars. And he cited, this falsehood of book bans. And then he also talked about telling teachers what they can't teach. But it's a pretty absurd assertion because, first of all, that stuff is relatively new, right? And so we're not talking about these results, number one, have been terrible since 2014. And also this culture war, quote unquote, these book war things, those are relatively new. Do I think ideology does make its way into classrooms? Yes. And is there a hyper-politicization in some classrooms? Yes. But I think it really could have only made a difference on the margins. And he knows that. So I thought that was a pretty lousy thing for him to say.
Erika, we're also seeing cases, more of them, of bold student violence against school staff. Earlier this week, a Texas assistant principal was beaten by students after that principal was trying to break up a fight. We saw in Florida a student being held on $1 million bond for attacking a teacher. What's the difference, do you think, about what you're seeing now versus before the pandemic?
The one thing that we're hearing, and this is sort of like regardless of geographic location, is that there's been a major uptick in serious disruptive behavior that is more violent. So unfortunately, I think that, again, keeping kids out of schools, away from that structure, away from those routines, like some norms went out of the window and they're having a really hard time recalibrating. So we're seeing an uptick. We're also seeing that it seems as if we're seeing more girls involved in these incidents than before. So that's just something for us to keep our eye on. I don't want the audience to think that in every town, teachers and administrators are getting beat up by students. That's not true. But what is true is that we're seeing more of it than ever before, and schools are really struggling to manage this problem. And I think that, I'm not exactly sure where the solution lies, but what is happening right now isn't working.
Parents Defending Education's Director of Outreach, Erika Sanzi. Great seeing you this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jan.